There is one question on everybody's mind right now in the wake of the Alawite Muslims being massacred in Syria, as well as Christians, as well as Druze, as well as Kurds, in the wake of Iranian singers being flogged for making music, in the wake of Afghan women being forced to cover their faces and prohibited from speaking in public, in the wake of Congolese Christians being massacred, Nigerians by Boko Haram, and the list keeps going. That question is, where are the humanitarians? Where are the social justice warriors? And there is one simple answer to that question. Do they not see it? Do they not know? No. They see it. They know. They're silent for a reason. Why? Because on the other end of that are Islamists, and Islamists are their ally. Are you ready to do this deep dive? Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand everything about their silence. So to understand where we are today, we're going to need to do a little bit of background. It begins with the Soviet Union, which was established in 1923. Now, why was the Western left so enamored by communism and Marxist revolutions in the Soviet Union? It's very simple, because you first have to understand what is the ideology of Western leftists. Their ideology is anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism. Now, that's not necessarily the words they use. What they use are anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anti-war. Well, isn't it interesting how all of these ideologies and regimes that they support just happen to be the biggest imperialists and colonizers in the world? So after the Soviet Union was established, because it branded itself on anti-imperialism, Western lefties loved it and they lapped it up. Why? Because it was the enemy to Americanism. It was the enemy to Westernism. So they allied with the Marxists and the communists. So as communism begins to spread predominantly between the 1920s and 1970s, what starts happening is that these regimes start to set up Potemkin villages for Westerners to come and visit and praise how amazing everything is. What is a Potemkin village? Have you ever seen that movie, The Interview, with what's his name, where they go to North Korea and they have the fake fruit in the stalls? It's essentially a fake village that's created to provide an illusion to the outside world that what's happening in that country is magnificent, when in fact what's really happening is death, devastation, and destruction. So it begins with Westerners traveling to Stalin's USSR, where at the time the Russian proletariat and Ukrainian farmers were being starved en masse in one of the biggest man-made famines in history, where millions and millions and millions were being killed or died under these collectivization policies. There was also the Great Purge, or the Great Terror, where within a period of 2 years, Stalin massacred up to 1.2 million Russian dissidents, putting people in concentration camps, in gulags, in labor camps. And guess what the Western leftists were saying when they were visiting these Potemkin villages? Oh my God, USSR is a bastion of freedom, safety, peace. Lies. It didn't stop there. The pattern just continued as Mao was massacring millions and millions of Chinese in the Laogai, which was essentially a re-education reform camp, which up to 50 million Chinese passed through, terrorized, murdered. And guess what the Western leftists were saying upon visiting Mao's Potemkin villages? You step into a world of safety, stability, enthusiasm, clean streets, clean talk, and positive thinking. Meanwhile, Mao had been responsible for the deaths of 70 million Chinese. Can you just put that into perspective? It didn't stop there. They would visit North Vietnam and talk about how remarkable it was under the communist regime. They would talk about Fidel Castro's Cuba, despite the fact that 2 million out of 11 million Cubans had fled, while Castro sent helicopters to drop sandbags on Cubans fleeing in shark-infested waters. Guess what the Western leftists were saying? Viva la revolution. What's to be understood from all of this? The Western leftists would always support the enemies of America and the enemies of the West, even when it meant supporting totalitarian, authoritarian, communist regimes. And then you say, well, but those were Marxist and communist leftists, so of course they supported Marxism and communism out in the world. How does that bring us to Islamists? I'll tell you how. Even though Islamists and leftists aren't technically ideologically aligned, they are aligned in one thing and one thing only, and that is their hatred for the West. So they aren't ideologically aligned, but they're aligned in their goals. So just as the left would try to cover up the disaster of communist regimes, so too do they continue to cover up the disaster of Islamist regimes. What do they get out of their alignment with the Islamists? Well, they see the Islamists as the reactionary force that's going to destroy the West. So once the Islamists bring down our Western systems, then the leftists believe that they're going to be able to implement their Marxist systems, not understanding that the Islamists would kill them all in the end anyway, which is exactly what happened in Iran in 1979, when the leftists collaborated with the Islamists to bring Khomeini's regime to Iran. And guess what Khomeini did as soon as the revolution was successful? Killed all the Marxists and the leftists. But here's what's essential. Because of that collaboration, because of that anti-Westernism, because of that anti-Americanism, the leftists must continue to make the Islamist regimes look like the good guys. That means no matter what they see in Iran, they're not going to say a word. Syria, they're not going to say a word. Afghanistan, Sudan, Nigeria, not going to say a word. But I just want to quickly add the point that it isn't just the leftists. We also have the woke right that are complicit in anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism, except they still believe that they're being pro-American. Because if you understand the political horseshoe, you understand that the extreme left and the extreme right meet at the lunatic fringe. And at the lunatic fringe, they actually inherit each other's ideas. And that's why you see the far right and the far left now aligning in supporting Islamist regimes. So now you understand why the humanitarians and social justice warriors of our time will not say a peep. It goes without saying that this anti-Western propaganda that elicits these ideologies is deeply, deeply problematic. And it's exactly what led to the support for October 7th and the infinite silence for all victims of Islamist regimes.